Good morning and afternoon and evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills. I'm the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute, and I want to welcome everyone for joining us here on our webinar here in August of 2021. And thank you for joining us. As you know, Global Innovation Institute is the world's leading certification, accreditation, and membership organization in the field of innovation, and we regularly sponsor different events every month. Typically, we have a webinar in addition to other events to really support and promote the innovation ecosystem and the body of knowledge and the community around innovation. So today, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest. Our guest is Ms. Susan Lindner, and Susan is a cultural anthropologist, a brand marketer, and a disruptor who believes that incredible connections change the world. She got her start as an age educator in the brothels of Thailand, helping to turn former prostitutes into entrepreneurs. And since that time, she's leveraged that background and developed significant experience in the world of communication. So today, Susan is a 20 plus year innovation storyteller and founder of the firm Emerging Media, an innovation communication consultancy that's dedicated to helping innovators and disruptive create stories that get them the resources, runway, and recognition they deserve. Susan has spoken to startups, innovators, and top executives from over 60 countries at Fortune 100s like GE, PwC, Deutsche Bank, and Capital One, and at global conferences, consulates, and trade organizations where she's spoken about strategic storytelling, U.S. market entry, and how to master the message in the media for maximum impact. Emerging Media's award-winning strategies, which Susan is hell-bent on sharing with the world, have resulted in 10 companies being acquired to date. Susan also gives back to the entrepreneurial community as a mentor to disruptive U.S. and international startups, and as a judge at premier competitions like New York Tech Week and the Mashies, and serves as a guest lecturer at New York University's Graduate School of Journalism. Susan is also the winner of multiple awards, including 3 Golden Bridge Awards, Smart CEO Magazine's Brava Award for Top Women CEOs in New York, PR News Digital PR Awards, American Business Awards Mentor of the Year, and Best in PR's Mobile and Wireless Award. You can learn more about Emerging Media at its website, emergingmediapr.com. Today, Susan's going to be talking to us about impactful storytelling for innovators and disruptives, in which, by cracking the code on history's greatest storytellers, Susan will give us a blueprint for creating our own stories that deliver a vision, a message, and a path that all stakeholders can follow with religious zeal. So with that, please join me now in welcoming Susan Lindner. Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And it's just so great to be in the company of so many tremendous innovators. We don't have an easy job of trying to change the world iteratively or with moonshot ideas that are really going to break through the status quo of how products and companies and people function today. And I contend that the only way to do that is with incredible stories. So let's get started, because I want to introduce you to a hero of mine, Bronislaw Malinowski. Now, if you just wouldn't mind in the chat, give me a show of hands, or just give me a Y or an N if you've ever heard of Bronislaw Malinowski before. So Bronislaw, if in case, and I'm just loving watching the chat going, who the heck is that? And there's a couple of Y's in there. Yes, Bronislaw Malinowski, if you don't know him, is one of the heroes in my field, one of the disruptors in my field, who is most well known for getting lost on his way to Papua New Guinea. Bronislaw Malinowski was a cultural anthropologist, had accumulated 3 PhDs by the time he was 29, and was an absolute innovator in the field of anthropology by recognizing things had to get done in a different way. Most anthropologists at the time would kind of pontificate on previous studies that had been conducted by fellow colleagues, often offering moralistic, sometimes racist ideas on top of what had come before, with new theories and postulates on how things were taking place in other cultures, how cultures were evolving. But Bronislaw, on his way to Australia during World War I, got lost in Papua New Guinea and settled there to do his field work. And what he came away with was an understanding that the only way to understand culture, the only way to understand change, the only way to understand the people with whom you work and their needs is to live with them, sleep with them, war with them, argue with them, marry, and really come to the day-to-day life of understanding those that we serve. This was such a breakthrough idea for its time. It's now called applied anthropology or participant observation. And this way of looking at the world, of diving deep, of getting in and listening rather than speaking first, was a game changer in the field of anthropology and really opened the door to virtually every other social science. If you think the open door policy came from some other Harvard Business School case study, you'd be wrong. It starts right here with Bronislaw Malinowski saying the only way to understand my people is to live with my people and listen to my people first. And so the art of great storytelling, especially for innovation, begins with great listening. I want to tell you that I wasn't always a brand marketer. I wasn't always someone dedicated to this field of innovation. My last job prior to getting into the field of PR and marketing was as an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control, doing AIDS research, looking at all of the variant and resistant strains of HIV entering the United States. This was back in 1999. Prior to that, I was taken and smitten with the idea of revolution. I had spent a good portion of time living in Central America, and I wanted to take up arms and join La Lucha, join the fight in Nicaragua. But I will say this, going to the front line of a war and seeing it up close at 19 is a very different perspective than what you see on CNN. And I decided that revolution was not the way that I wanted to make change in the world. And instead, I set off on a path to change the focus of my anthropological studies and focused on AIDS, tourism, and prostitution in Thailand. And that's what I wrote my thesis on. And it would eventually go to work with Thai and indigenous populations in Thailand, helping them to prevent the spread of HIV. Now, when I first got to Thailand in 1994, this was the standard public health response to HIV. And this is a billboard that effectively says, get AIDS and die. The theme was fear. And if this doesn't do it for you, nothing will. The idea was that if we could scare people into using condoms, into changing their behavior, that they would. And you know what? It worked. This shock and awe campaign lasted for about 6 months, and it was incredibly effective. We saw HIV infection rates plummet in northern Thailand, right on the Burmese border where I was working. But then strangely, 6 months later, we watched those same rates climb and climb again. And like any good marketer, we did what we knew, which was we doubled down on fear. And once again, we saw that same trajectory of declining numbers and then increasing again. And HIV was incredibly prevalent where I lived. 1 in 6 sexually active people were HIV positive, and there were about 3 AIDS funerals a day where I lived. So we were really scratching our heads trying to figure out how to change the narrative, how to change the behavior of our population, because without it, people were dying. Now, one other thing I want to mention about this is that my only tool at the time for you innovators out there was the condom. So can I just ask in the chat, if you wouldn't mind taking a guess, how old do you think the condom is? I want you to just put in the chat how old you think the condom is. When was the condom first invented? Let's talk about real innovation here. 1950 or maybe 75 years ago. When was the condom invented? 2000 years ago in Egypt. Good guess. Good guess, 50 years ago. Okay, well, I'm going to burst your bubble. Folks, the condom was invented. First archaeological evidence of the condom, which is a cave painting in France, was 10,000 years ago. There is a painting of a condom. We don't know to this day if this was a public health message or someone bragging about last night, but we do know that the condom is roughly 10,000 years old. So we're talking as innovators here. I'm not talking about some breakthrough new technology that was really going to change people's behavior overnight. In fact, I realized that the only tool that I had at my disposal was the condom, a very ancient tool to stop the spread of this deadly disease. So we realized that the only thing really we had to work with was the narrative. And that's when I had the aha moment around how storytelling changes everything. So we realized that the story needed to change, but oftentimes we were derailed in our thinking about that story by what we called the Seagull. So the Seagull for us is oftentimes a consultant or an outside force, or maybe even someone internally who comes over to our desk, drops a vat of data and says, here's some data for you to figure out how to solve that really challenging problem you've been grappling with. And that data may or may not be culturally appropriate. It may have a completely different viewpoint or focus or political agenda than the one that you might be needing to solve. And oftentimes we refer to them as seagulls because they would fly in, drop their big load of data on our desks and fly away. And so that seagull was oftentimes less helpful than we would have liked, but always a political force that we had to keep in mind. So I guess I'll ask you, who is the seagull in your life right now? Is there a consultant or an outside force or an internal department that's constantly dropping data on your desk that may be derailing you from the right story? Or maybe, is there data there that can help you better tell your story? I want to let you know I had 3 core audiences for this shift that I needed to make in the world of storytelling. First were the mama-sans. These were the women who owned the brothels. There were certainly the customers, and there were the sex workers, those individuals who made their living every day just trying to survive in this economy. So I'll ask you, what do you think is the motivation around that mama-san who's running a brothel day in and day out? Well, when we went to talk to her, because we're in listening mode now, is money. That's right. Thank you, Anthony. Money was the primary driver. And what about for our customer? What was their main motivation? Maybe we all know it's a really good night out. And frankly, for the sex worker, their motivation was supporting their families and frankly, surviving. Now, sex work had been a pretty standard institution in Thailand for hundreds of years. Usually it was about a 2-year stint. You would do your work and then go home to a family who had become enriched by the work of women. But now with HIV, that rubric, that metric was changing, and women were not coming home, or they were coming home and spreading the disease, as were their customers. So 3 core audiences had to try to convince to make condoms a day-to-day part of their life. So we had to shift the narrative, and we realized the one core thing that needed to change is that we needed to make every single person believe that they were the hero of their own story, that they had a part to play if they were going to take up the innovation, in this case, the condom, that we were asking them to use. So we needed to switch the narrative. And for that mama-san, we changed the narrative to, I'm going to be a fixture of my community that has the cleanest brothel in town. We made it a competitive advantage. For the customer, we made him the hero of his family by ensuring that the story that we told is that he would see him as the protector of his family rather than the potential infector of his family. And for the sex worker, we provided her the opportunity to become an entrepreneur, to see and to own her own destiny in a way that she couldn't have imagined before. And so I want to stop for a minute and ask you, how often in the narrative that you tell about your innovation, the shift that you are making or trying to make in your organization? How often do you stop and ask the question, am I making the listener of my story the hero, the center point, where all things point to that person's life changing for the better? Because oftentimes we're so fixated on our innovation that we forget the people that we're selling it to. So, in addition to being an anthropology major in college, I was also a religion major, and I was fascinated by how the prophets, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius, they moved the word around the world. How did they do that? No Twitter, no Facebook, no broadcast media, just oftentimes 12 close friends who understood the meaning, took it inside of themselves, and they found a new way to share a story that we hadn't heard before. Perhaps it was a very ancient story that we needed to hear again and again and again in order to create behavior change. And so I studied how the prophets shared their communication. And for me, they are the greatest viral marketers of all time. What do I mean by that? They get other people to tell their stories for them long after they're gone. In fact, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years later, we're still telling the stories of Moses and Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad. Why is that? How did they do it? How do we as corporate executives, as innovators who are trying to create a behavior change, trying to get other people to see the world in a new way, how do they do it? How do we do it? The prophets did something very specific. They spoke in parables. And I want to walk you through these 5 specific ways, these 5 eternal rules of storytelling that all of the prophets use. And frankly, all of the prophets of our time, our innovators of our time, like Jobs and Bezos and Gates and Warren Buffett and many, many others, use these same techniques every time they speak about innovation and change. The first thing they do is they talk about our history, this shared history of where we all come from together, right? Jesus didn't throw out Judaism when he talked about Christianity. He led us to understand we come from a shared place, a shared calendar, shared history, shared values, which is step 2. Once we understand what is the shared history that we have, and you can think about our colleagues at work, what is the reason that we come to work each day? What's the reason we decided to come to work for this company? What are the experiences that we've had here together? We now move on to the values and purpose, those things that we intrinsically believe in that come from that shared history. What the prophets do at this point is understand that there are values that we bring with us: honesty, integrity, competition, transparency, whatever those core values are that you might own. We now recognize that not only are those values important, but there are new values that needed to be added on top. And frankly, our purpose. Where are we moving forward? Where is our new future going that looks somewhat different from our past? Step number 3 is our message, which is perhaps the hardest part for us to, as innovators, to think about and to write, is what is the shift that is taking place? The message needs to be that thing that takes us from the past into a new future that, frankly, the multitudes can't yet see. That message from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek is a message of change. And every single one of the prophets, be it in faith or in business, will point you a direction where we cannot go back and do what we used to do. We cannot go back to the old way of doing things. The message is the point where we burn the boats and we move forward. It's really important to get that message clear and also repeatable so that our early adopters, sometimes the biggest skeptics in the room, can begin to adopt that message. So it has to be clear, easy, understandable. That viral language now is what our early adopters, once you've identified those folks, maybe 12, right? That group, those early adopters who say, I believe what you believe, Mr. Innovator, Mr. Disruptor. I believe what you believe. I want to follow. I want to take the message forward. Giving those followers viral language that is easily shared over mediums like social media, certainly. Giving them viral language is what changes everything. It allows a message to travel because innovators need movement and they need momentum. Innovation is like a shark. It never stands still. It needs language that matches that movement in order to gain momentum. And I'm happy to share this with you. If you'd like to just put your name in the chat, I'll happily share these 5 eternal rules of innovation storytelling with you. So for my skeptics out there who are listening and saying, yeah, stories are great, but I'm kind of a 3-bullet kind of guy. My executives only want it short, sweet, and to the point. Don't bog me down with stories. I hate to break it to you, but stories are the way that human beings learn. Unfortunately, we are not computers that can simply absorb Excel spreadsheets easily and repeat them with accuracy. Stories are powerful because this is the way that human beings have always accepted information. And I want to challenge you for a moment to think about, what is strategy really anyway? Until we put strategy into action, strategy is a story. Strategy is the story that we tell ourselves in order to gather the momentum to create behavior change and move things forward. So, and one other thing I'll ask you to contemplate is the only 2 ways that human beings actually learn anything is by experience, touch the stove and know it's hot, or by a story. Mom said, don't touch the stove, it's hot, and you'll burn yourself. Now, you might contend that you could learn things through ayahuasca or through a prophetic dream, also other ways of obtaining information. But for the most part here on Earth, that's how we get information, experience or story. And for my innovators who say, well, I do it by experiment, I'm guessing that you first became intrigued and inspired by the stories you heard in science class, even if you never got to perform the experiment yourself. And one other thing I'd just like to share is that Stanford has done the research for us, and we know that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts. When a classroom was asked to remember a list of items, just like you might in a meeting, those items that were wrapped in story were 22 times more memorable. So I'll ask you, are you going to create those beautiful PowerPoint decks and all of those Excel spreadsheets, knowing that your colleagues are going to forget everything that you shared with them 6 minutes later? I'm asking you to think about wrapping your data and statistics in stories, because innovation requires memory in order for us to move forward. And storytelling is your memory-making device. In that sense, it's an incredible productivity tool, so you don't have to constantly repeat yourself. The story will do the repeating for you. So, my original desire was to be this revolutionary. And frankly, all revolutions, including the .com revolution back in 1999, began with a little bit of fear. Many of us on this call remember Y2K. It was this terror, right? That planes were going to fall from the sky, jail cells were going to open, nuclear reactors couldn't keep up between calendars and clocks. And fear, just like my AIDS experiments, worked for a while and then didn't. Everything in 1999 was revolutionary. But in the sharing economy, that is not what works. Fear is not what motivates anyone for the long term. It's actually goodwill. And innovation, correct me if I'm wrong, is the science of making other people's lives better. When we share a story and we share the goodwill that's created by innovation, that's when we really drive breakthrough. And that's when other people get behind our innovation. So something else I want to share is that goodwill. Goodwill stories we know from CAT scans and MRIs and watching brain scans live. When we tell a story of goodwill, i.e., I'm here to make your life better, we get this incredible rush of serotonin and dopamine and adrenaline in the brain that fixes a story in the brain. It's the memory making device that has a chemical reaction in the brain that allows the listener to take it with them. And in fact, every time you tell a great story, one that can be passed on to someone else, you're inherently creating behavior change from someone who is sitting inert to someone who is taking your message and putting it in motion. Do you know what happens when you tell a story? The minute you tell a story to someone else, that listener's brain is actively looking for a story that relates to the one that you're telling. It looks for experiences. It looks for sensations and scents, smells, tastes, all of those 5 senses that it can connect with the story that you are telling. When you tell a really involved, evocative story, our brains connect and we hold on to the story, and it makes it possible for us to share it. Now, why does that matter? If we're thinking about our customers, we know that it immediately reduces stress activity. We have a greater sense of reward when we tell a story that makes someone else's life better. I'm still talking about your innovation to someone else, if you couch it in how you make people's lives better. And the last one is greater caregiving related activity. What does that look like? Greater caregiving related activity is leaving, I guess today's modern standard would be a Yelp review. Leaving a notice for your tribe to say, eat at this restaurant, don't eat at this restaurant, is the same as saying, eat that mushroom, don't eat that mushroom, or have a really trippy experience with that mushroom to our fellow ancestors, right? Way, way back. And that automatically produces a response in the brain of great gratification just by being able to warn someone when something is bad or inviting them to try something that you found to be good. It's an ancient instinct in us. So, and the other reason is that millennials, who now are the largest group in the workforce, we know what storytelling does for them. When the content is generated by a peer, by a fellow user, we know it's more influential on purchases, we know it's more memorable, and we know it's more trustworthy. So what I'm trying to point out is that storytelling is so critical, and frankly, the art of getting other people to tell your story is so critical because it has a dramatic impact on the bottom line, and it has an even greater impact on innovation. So when you think about companies that are really changing the face of things, right, like Domino's or Alibaba, or some that's falling off our radar a little bit, like Gopro, I want to ask you, what are these companies really selling? So a company like Domino's has the opportunity to tell an explicit story. An explicit story is front and center. It tells you exactly what they're doing, and it tells you all about their product. An implicit story is one that hides a little bit in the background. The one that says, let this story do the talking for me rather than come from the corporation itself. So here's Patrick Doyle, the former CEO of Domino's Pizza. With his ad campaign is Domino's Pizza Sucks. This was his ad campaign. And it was a recognition and a truth-telling opportunity to say how they were going to innovate pizza delivery and pizza making, because they had to confess and fall on their knees that Domino's Pizza sucked. And if you took a look at Twitter and you saw what people were saying, you'd know that microwave pizza is superior. Now, what Patrick Doyle decided to do was to completely remake every pizza from the ground up: sauce, cheese, crust, delivery, hiring, firing, you name it. And in fact, had you invested in Domino's Pizza in 2005, your shares would have had more value than had you invested in Apple stock in 2005. The shift that took place for Domino's Pizza was epic. Because they became transparent about that story, and they actively told customers, tell us what's wrong. They engaged the customer to allow them to tell a new narrative and a new story that would allow the company to innovate from the customer's perspective first. Alibaba is a pretty incredible company. Jack Ma, former co-founder, one of 17 co-founders of Alibaba, bigger than Amazon in China, certainly. And Alibaba takes its culture and its innovation culture to a new level. It says that the buying and selling of goods online starts with trust. And in China, they couldn't get people to actually buy online because they didn't believe that their products or services would actually arrive. And in order to foster the internet revolution in China, Jack Ma had to set up his own escrow bank called Alipay. And if you bought a product on Alibaba, it went into Alipay and your funds were held there until your product arrived at your doorstep, you were satisfied with the product, and then and only then was the seller paid. By fostering this connection of trust, Jack Ma was able to open the door for e-commerce entirely in China that previously had really not existed. That explicit story of how trust is formulated began with an understanding and a deep listening of the customer that really hadn't existed previously. And so that story that's told begins with one of trust. So the last I'll show you is Gopro. And now that each of us have a camera on our phones, we haven't really needed that external camera anymore. But I do want to show you one thing about them. How many brands do you know that allow their customers to make up all of their marketing when the story comes directly from the customer rather than the brand itself? Are you at a point right now in your company where you could let the employees talk freely about how great it is to work there? Give them a social platform and allow them to do that. Are you at a place where you could have a Facebook or an Instagram or even a Clubhouse chat where you could allow all of your customers to talk uninterrupted about what they love and maybe even about what they dislike about the brand? Is that a space that you'd be willing to set up to allow free-flowing storytelling to come to pass? And if you're an innovator, is there a space internally where you would allow other people to take a look at and perhaps initially give feedback on your prototype or your MVP prior to it being ready for prime time? An implicit underlying story allows other people to tell your story for you and get feedback without filter. So how many of you, and just give me a yes or a no in the chat, have heard of Dollar Shave Club? If you haven't before, Dollar Shave Club is that direct-to-consumer brand that allows you to buy razors for shaving directly to your door. So it was one of the first online e-commerce opportunities that was direct to consumer. And this is Mike. Mike is one of the founders of Dollar Shave Club. And Mike's vision for Dollar Shave Club was to create a deeply friendly brand that would allow people to really get in close touch with him as the founder, but also the community of users around Dollar Shave Club. So what if I could convince you that Dollar Shave Club doesn't actually sell razors, it sells enlightenment? Could I convince you that Dollar Shave Club sells enlightenment? Well, take a look at how it speaks to its customers. Enlightened customer number 161. This is how they address their customers. I save $100 a year on shaving now. Basically, I'm a genius. Okay, great. Dollar Shave Club has like very clear keys to its success. It's a strong story. It's insanely consistent. And they really allow the founder, let's say our profit in this case, speak directly to consumers. Every part of the Dollar Shave Club experience speaks to this enlightened membership. And I'll have you note that when we tell an innovation story, consistency is key. When we talk to our customers, in this case, we're talking to members. How many of you have thought about the people that are actually using your endpoint innovation as members of a club, as a community of individuals who will begin to not only love the product or service that you're working on, but share that like a community, like a membership? So Dollar Shave Club started that way, not just a haphazard group of users, but rather a community. And who doesn't want to be in a club with a champion Mexican wrestler and an award-winning wood carver? Who doesn't want to receive packaging in the mail each month that makes you laugh and makes you feel part of something bigger? Like your face isn't an icy windshield, don't scrape it. And even product development, even R&D comes down to truly listening to the user in a way perhaps that we hadn't before. Dollar Shave Club doesn't go to the mall and set up a sterile focus group. Rather, it goes to where the customers are. They would stand outside of porta potties, let's say at a motorcycle festival or at the Gilroy Garlic Festival in California, and ask people to go inside and try these one wipe Charlies. This is how they decided to expand their brand. And it was a way that people hadn't done product marketing or frankly R&D before. And that opportunity to engage the customer before the product even began was an amazing way to get direct feedback from a customer in the environment where they would feel most comfortable using it. And so the anatomy of a great innovation story is that, yes, we sell high quality razors cheaply and we save you money. That's okay. We deliver it straight to your door. We save you time and frustration. In fact, their tagline is shave time, shave money. Really memorable, really easy to share. But you notice one thing that Dollar Shave Club didn't do is that they didn't shame them. They didn't include fear about how they sold their product, but rather they asked them to join the ranks of the enlightened. And frankly, so many of them did. Dollar Shave Club has a ton of storytellers. I think I now know what young men do on a Saturday morning once they get their delivery of Dollar Shave Club products. They make dioramas and artwork out of it. They set up whole armies of Dollar Shave Club soldiers who are willing to fight one another for the glory of getting to, what is it, the next beard wax that frankly, people who are buying razors shouldn't even be buying, right? There are thousands and thousands of storytellers around Dollar Shave Club who just want to tell you for free how much they love the product. So I ask you, when you think about your own innovation, are you beginning to think with the message in mind as you're creating this innovation? How will people talk about it? How will people share the story of your innovation? I do want to give you a little bit of a cautionary tale though. And that begins here. 3 years after launch, Dollar Shave Club was doing pretty great. 2.3 million subscribers, 51% market share. Does anyone know who Dollar Shave Club's biggest competitor was at the time? Who's the biggest razor brand in the world? Who did you probably use this morning if you were shaving? Gillette, that's right, absolutely. So Gillette wound up being purchased by P&G, by Procter & Gamble, right? The world's largest consumer packaged good. Very important. And so watching this all take place, what do you think Gillette did when it saw its disruptive competitor nipping at its heels? They started the Gillette Club, a direct-to-consumer brand that will allow you to buy Gillette products directly to your door. Just a Y or an N in the comments here. How many of you are a member of the Gillette Club? Yeah, nobody. Who even knew that the Gillette Club existed? Well, Dollar Shave Club went on to fantastic success 5 years after its launch, and it was bought by $1 billion by Unilever. $1 billion. Why would Unilever, who had never been in the razor business before, buy a one-trick pony of a guy who sells razors? Why would he do that? Why would Unilever rather do that? Unilever, first and foremost, had now had an opportunity to compete head-to-head against Procter & Gamble, its biggest rival, in this category. They did it to remain competitive. But not only did they do that, it was their first ever direct-to-consumer brand, and it was an opportunity to capitalize on a millennial market that they had never truly had access to in a tight way with amazing data. And frankly, a group of people who were so passionate about a product that they actually hired Mike to come in and be their head of direct-to-consumer. Mike spends his time now bundling other Unilever brands under the Dollar Shave Club brand together with these razors. So now they are selling multiple products directly into the home. The one thing I want to caution you about is when you look at this brand, did anybody become completely enamored with the razors during the course of this talk? We didn't, right? And I hope not, because the focus of this conversation is all about the people. And as innovators, it's really easy for us to get tripped up on, if we're Steve Jobs, the iPhone, right? If we're Bill Gates, hopefully we didn't get tripped up on the Zune. I guess we did, right? That competitor to the iPod. But what I want to remind each of our innovators on the call today is that the story, if you're a Star Wars fan, is always about Luke Skywalker. It is never about the lightsaber. The lightsaber is just a tool that helps Luke accomplish his mission. But the story is all about making Luke the hero. And so that shift into an understanding, not to focus on the innovation, right? For me, it was not focusing on the condom when I was a humble AIDS educator in rural Thailand, but rather the recipient of that story, of our innovation story, that way that we get people to change their behavior. And so the mechanisms that we put in place around storytelling, number one, they give people a sense of belonging. The prophets knew how to do this right from the beginning. They make you identify with the teller of the story and the outcome of the story. Where are you taking us? They make you laugh, perhaps, or they make you think more deeply about yourself and your own future. And they have to be told with great authenticity. There's nothing worse in the corporate innovation setting than a false prophet, one who's telling us about a great innovation that's going to change the world that doesn't, one that tells us about a new product or service that makes the product more important than the user. There's a reason that we've shifted to user experience, customer experience, as all part of our shift in the sharing economy. It is about making somebody else's life better. So the story that we tell and the mechanisms that we employ must start with the user. So I'll ask you, what are the mechanisms that you're putting in place to truly listen to the recipient of the story? Now, I also want to tell you there's never a time where we should underestimate the power of a micro story to connect and transport people. Unfortunately, we don't always do it very well. I want to share this story with you about Dropbox. Have we all heard about Dropbox, this cloud-based file sharing service? Yeah, we all use it all over the world. Dropbox had a great opportunity. They were reaching their 100 millionth item saved in a Dropbox. And so they asked all of their users to please share their best experiences, the most important thing that they've ever put on. And so people started uploading these great pictures of their architectural designs or the advertisements they created, even a sonogram. Unfortunately, internally and externally, this is how these stories were shared. Just a rolling, scrolling screen. And one of the most important stories I thought that came out of that experience were these foster parents here who had adopted children from all over the world and kept all of their kids' medical records in one place. And at one point where they had a really terrifying medical experience, they counted on Dropbox to actually save their child's life. But unfortunately, when the story was told, it got mixed in with all of these other stories and it never had any prominence. It never talked about how the innovation, like this humble file sharing service, was really able to save someone's life. It got lost. So I don't doubt that everyone on this call has an incredible innovation story to tell. What is the mechanism and the medium that you're using to tell it? Are your great innovation stories and the people that you're helping and changing their lives, are they getting lost along the way? I'm begging you not to let that happen. I'm always inspired by this quote from Bill Gates. If you give people the tools, right, to use and really use their abilities to the fullest and their curiosity, that they will develop things in ways that will surprise you every time. And for those of us who work in innovation, we know that those things that we create go off into the world and we use them differently. So I want to give you some suggestions on how you can begin to become an innovation storyteller, perhaps in a way that you haven't thought of before. Now, you can decide to be the expert in your company, in the market, out in the world. You can be the one like Condé Nast, National Geographic Traveler, for example, who could point out where is the best pub in all of Dublin to hear live Irish folk music. You could be that expert. Now stop for a minute and ask yourself, where am I the expert? And how could I make someone's life better if I shared what I knew? You could be that wise Yoda. Or you can use an expert, right? You could be like Condé Nast Traveler, and you could seek out an author and a food expert who will tell you the very best pastry shop in all of Venice to try Italian pastry. You could use an expert rather than being the expert to help share the story of your innovation. You could also let community members, other people inside the company or outside the company, help to tell their stories. So if someone asked me to picture what springtime in Paris looked like, it would probably be a picture of a flower in front of an Eiffel Tower. I'm not a real visual thinker, but other people in the community certainly are. When you think about the innovation that you're working on now, what if you could incorporate other facets of that diamond to get other people to share their perspectives on your innovation and how it's impacting them? So this person, brought in beautiful, luxurious jewelry, this lovely box, some macarons, some fresh flowers. That's what springtime in Paris looks like to her. Just like in Dollar Shave Club, what was your innovation look like to them? And have you bothered asking? You might find the feedback even more inspirational than what it was that it took to create your innovation to begin with. And maybe you want to be really brave and you just want to create open opportunities for sharing stories where users, customers, creators all get together and just leave their impressions of your fantastic innovation with the rest of the world. So Guardian has just decided to set up a site where you can share all of your photos from travel. And it becomes this place where great photography gets shared. And The Guardian has used many amateur photos to show up in the pages of its magazine and on its website. So we know that it matters when we get other people engaged in the story and engaged in our innovation. We know that when they see stuff made by other people rather than the company that created it, that they're on a higher path to purchase. And they're more apt to interact with a photo that doesn't come from the company, but rather comes from other users. So in Innovation Story, I want to ask you to expand your horizon and thinking beyond just what you thought about making your innovation, getting it through the sausage grinder, the meat grinder that is idea to execution to scale. And think about who are the other apostles, who are the other followers, the early adopters along the way who can help you tell your story so that you ultimately reach that finish line. And I'll ask you, what's your story and what's the one you'll tell next? And Anthony, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was just wonderful. So at this point, for the remainder of our time, we'll open up the floor to questions. You feel free to type a question in the chat box if you want. You're getting applause, by the way, Susan. or you feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly if you prefer. I actually, let me kick it off. I have one question for you. It kind of related to the authenticity thing. The question is, does an organization, do we need to have like that superstar, that Steve Jobs or something to create an authentic story, or can anyone do this essentially?
Anyone can and anyone must. So we don't need to be superstar storytellers, but I will say this, the more and more I see in large corporations, here's what I'm hearing. Innovators are going in to talk to CEOs about their incredible creations, and the CEO is leaving more confused than when he went into the meeting. That there are cross-geographical, cross-cultural innovations that are being going from prototype to MVP to scale. And there's no cohesive story that says why it's so important or to get people on board. There are arguments in the engineering department that say, I'm at 100% capacity. Where do you want to find 20% of my time on this new thing that we don't even know if it's going to work? Why should I even bother taking my guys off projects that I know are fulfilling our quarterly requirements to try something utterly new? The story is the only thing that opens that door that gets the head of engineering to say, let's give it a shot. And so we don't need the superstar. We don't need a rock star storyteller. What we need are people who are able to tell a story with authenticity and that engages the listener. So how often do we stop and ask the question, hey, head of engineering, what matters most to you? Where do you want to be by the end of the year? What would make you a rock star if this amazing prototype actually comes to fruition? Don't you want to be part of that initial team? Don't you want to be part of the Mars rover team? And so you don't have to be the greatest storyteller in the world. You have to be passionate and enthusiastic about what you're selling. And you have to be willing to leave some of your scientific jargon, if that's your field, behind in order to really connect with the listener.
Very good. We have another question here, Susan. I'll read this to you and you can think about it and maybe give us an answer. How do you balance the need for a consistent, cohesive story with a different type of people that look for different supporting rationale for change? Some are more story and emotional, others are more logical, some are data-driven. Do we need multiple stories? How do we do that?
Let me ask you a question. Did the same story to put you to bed every night? Or was your mom really smart about recognizing that the same story wasn't always going to work? Of course, because the listener is different each time. And if we start with the premise that the listener is the hero, then your job is to begin with empathy and figure out what's going to make that listener move, that listener become excited about your story. So it might begin with, here's where this product or service came from. Here's why we created it. But it always has to be followed up with, here's why it matters to you. Or here's what we heard you say was important to you. And you have to combine those visions together. That's part of the responsibility of the storyteller, right? Dollar Shave Club isn't sitting in a sterile environment trying to figure out how to make the next wipe without going to the customer and saying, what's important to you? So it's that combination, because you're right, not every story, right? Not every story in the Bible or the Quran or, in the Dharma moves us. Different stories have different resonance with us. And the prophets knew that. They didn't just tell one single story. There were lots of stories to be told. And that's what we have to do in order to make people shift from the status quo into something new, into a terrifying future that they can't yet see, but you can. And just one more thing I want to add about that. Change itself is inherently terrifying and stressful, right? Just going to the refrigerator section of the supermarket and not finding the brand of vanilla ice cream that you want on the day you want it is frustrating and annoying because you have to change and buy a different brand. Agony. Now you're asking someone to switch email providers, the way they store data, the new product or service. You're inherently inducing stress. A story is now intended to induce pleasure. You have the opportunity to release dopamine, serotonin, all of those incredible pleasure-inducing centers in the brain to make innovation less terrifying and more acceptable, where you get other people to say, don't you want a little of this?
I have a
Very
question.
good.
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Steve.
First of all, great job. But my question is, my company, I reinvented the faucet. And as you can see, it's the elegant combination of a water fountain and a bathroom faucet. But telling the story, I've been told, that I need to get out there and talk about, I'm very passionate about it if you can't tell, but
Oh, yes.
tell the story through video. And logistically, I'm thinking, okay, there's different tools, YouTube and all that, but have you learned of a great tool for video stories? Is it Vidyard? Is there something else you know about?
I suppose you're showcasing a product, right? As opposed to a person.
Correct. Well, I mean, I guess telling the story, it's more than just rinsing or getting a drink. It's an eye wash. You can rinse your hair, even like my father on days he couldn't stand in the shower because he was getting his knee replaced. You can take pills or vitamins. Seniors in a senior living facility are dehydrated. It offers an ability for hydration. There's lots of different use cases, and telling that story of why it's more than just a water fountain, is important.
Right. I mean, I'm just listening to you thinking about endless 2-minute videos that you could show with each of those uses.
Right, but the logistics of creating those videos, it's not just take your iPhone and shoot it, right? I mean, there's got to be there's Vidyard, there's other tools out there. Have you found a tool that works great for that? Is really my question.
I wish I could say that that's my strong suit, but probably not. I'm more of a words girl than I am a video woman. But Vidyard is good. But I would absolutely encourage you to start doing it with your iPhone. You're in prototype mode. You're innovating the story right now. So make lots of crappy videos is what I would tell you. Make an endless volume of crappy videos until you hit the one that goes well and that people begin responding to. We are just as enthralled with the process of how you're doing it as we are the final outcome if you're beginning with our best intentions in mind.
By the way, the cool story is the name Nasoni comes from the Nasoni fountains of Rome. So if you know that story, if you look that up, you'll see.
There you go.
So I think we have maybe time for one more question. There was a question here. Maybe it would be a good one to end with. And the question is, can you outsource? Can you outsource someone telling your story? I think you hit a couple of points that relate to that. I mean, one was the authenticity, but the other was engaging your community. So why don't you talk to outsourcing your storytelling, and we'll wrap it up with that question.
Yeah, so I guess what we're talking about is a marketing firm or someone else in the company, the PR and marketing division. I would say you absolutely can. I didn't have a PR and marketing firm for 20 years for no reason, but I will say this, it has absolutely positively become a leadership skill, in which case, if you are innovating and you are going, I've been at the bench for the last 20 years and I've had my breakthrough, now I'm going to turn it over to so-and-so to go into the CEO and talk about it. I can guarantee you that person is not showing up with the same passion and enthusiasm as you are. And so I'd want to make sure that you're absolutely have a seat at the table when that story gets told. But I would do this. So one thing to keep in mind, if I could just give you a storytelling technique, I want you to think about it in threes. Number one is that life went around along as we knew it for a good long time. And here are all the ways that we solved X problem before, right? It's status quo. Then your innovation comes along and there is a boom, there's a shift, there's a change. And it may be your innovation that's a shift, or it may be something that's happening in the world like COVID, right? That creates a shift. Something fundamentally has changed and we cannot ever go back to the way things were. So status quo, the big bang shift. And now tell me what happens as a byproduct of what comes next. I invented this cool new thing so that the following would happen. And since then, the following has changed, and the following has changed, and the following will change. And then tell me what the moral of the story is. So status quo, big shift. Now tell me what everything that's cascaded, everything that you imagine that will happen on the other side of that innovation. And then finally finish by telling me how my life is fundamentally better now that that change has taken place. Tell me how my life changes. Put me in the future so that I can see it. Make me the hero of that new future. That's how you tell a great innovation story. Just 3 easy steps. Status quo, big bang. Tell me what shifted and how my life is better, and yours will be too.
Thank you, Susan. I really like that. It's like basically casting the vision for the future and then putting your people in there and making them the hero of that new future. I think that really gets a lot of stakeholder buy-in. And this is, in my experience, a very key element of stakeholder management is really telling the stories and casting the vision and getting them to buy in and become the hero. And, and if you're telling the story to many people at the same time, of course, you have to figure out how to weave in all of these different heroes, for what matters to them. So there's a lot of art to this. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I just want to thank you, Susan, and I want to thank everyone that has participated today so much. Afterwards, we will be distributing the recording of this session to all those who registered, including yourselves and those who couldn't make it, so that you'll have a chance to watch this again. And we'll include, the website for Susan's firm, and so you can contact them if you have any additional questions. So with that, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank
Namaste.
you, everyone.